The November fog of 1891 had settled upon London with the persistence of an unwelcome guest, transforming the familiar thoroughfares into mysterious corridors of grey vapour. From our lodgings at 221B Baker Street, the gas lamps below appeared as mere halos of amber light, their illumination swallowed by the thick, choking mist that had plagued the city for 3 consecutive days. It was precisely the sort of weather that seemed to breed mysteries, and as I sat across from my friend Sherlock Holmes at our breakfast table, I could not have imagined that we were about to encounter one of the most perplexing cases of our long association. Holmes, as was his custom during such dreary mornings, had arranged the daily newspapers in a precise semicircle around his place setting, his keen grey eyes scanning each publication with the methodical attention of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. The Times lay folded to his left, the Standard to his right, while the Morning Post commanded his immediate attention. I observed the familiar signs of his intellectual appetite being whetted, the slight forward lean of his angular frame, the unconscious drumming of his long fingers against the tablecloth, and, most tellingly, the gradual narrowing of his eyes as they fixed upon a particular column of text. "Watson," he said suddenly, his voice carrying that peculiar note of suppressed excitement that I had learned to associate with cases of unusual complexity. "What would you say to a violin that performs without strings?" I lowered my copy of the British Medical Journal and regarded him with the mixture of curiosity and skepticism that his more outlandish observations typically provoked. "I should say it was impossible, Holmes. The very principle of string instruments requires the vibration of tensioned wire or gut to produce sound." "Precisely my own thoughts," he replied, folding the Morning Post with characteristic precision and sliding it across the table toward me. "And yet, if we are to believe the account printed here, such an impossibility occurred last evening in Belgravia, witnessed by no fewer than 6 individuals of unimpeachable reputation." The headline that greeted my eyes was sensational, even by the standards of London journalism. "Phantom violinist terrorizes Belgravia, mysterious music heard from locked room as prominent collector found dead." The article that followed, written in the breathless prose typical of crime reporting, detailed circumstances that defied rational explanation. The victim was identified as Mr. Reginald Ashworth, a gentleman of considerable means and a noted collector of rare musical instruments. His Belgravia residence, a stately Georgian mansion that had been in his family for 3 generations, had become the scene of what the reporter termed supernatural manifestations of the most disturbing nature. According to the account, Mr. Ashworth had been discovered deceased in his private music room at approximately midnight, the door locked from within and the windows securely fastened. The circumstances surrounding his death, however, were rendered infinitely more mysterious by the testimony of his household staff. The butler, a man named Pemberton who had served the family for 27 years, swore that he had been awakened by the sound of violin music emanating from his master's music room. The piece, which he identified as Paganini's Caprice No. 24, was performed with such technical brilliance that he initially assumed Mr. Ashworth had invited a professional musician for a private recital. Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, corroborated this account, adding that the music had continued for nearly a quarter of an hour before ceasing abruptly. When the household investigated, they found the music room door locked and received no response to their increasingly urgent knocking. Upon forcing entry, they discovered Mr. Ashworth collapsed beside his prized violin collection, apparently the victim of heart failure. The detail that had clearly captured Holmes's attention, and which elevated this tragedy from mere coincidence to genuine mystery, concerned the state of Mr. Ashworth's most treasured instrument, a 1,734 Guarneri del Gesù violin, valued at several £1,000s and renowned for its exceptional tonal qualities, was found lying upon the Persian carpet near his body. The instrument appeared undamaged, its varnish gleaming in the gaslight, its proportions perfect save for one inexplicable detail. Every string had been removed, not broken, not snapped in some violent struggle. but carefully detached and wound into neat coils that lay beside the instrument like silk ribbons. The bridge remained in position, the tailpiece undisturbed, the tuning pegs turned to their proper tension, yet the violin had been rendered as mute as a wooden sculpture. Holmes continued, retrieving the newspaper and indicating a particular paragraph, "are naturally baffled. Inspector Bradstreet, whom we have encountered before, is quoted as saying that while the death appears natural, the circumstances surrounding it are highly irregular and deserving of further investigation. He makes no mention, you will note, of any theory that might explain how a stringless violin produced the music that awakened the household." I found myself studying the account with growing fascination. Could the music have originated from another source? Perhaps a neighbor practicing at an unusual hour, or a street musician whose performance was carried by the wind. An astute suggestion, Watson, but the article addresses that possibility. The music was heard distinctly from within the house, growing louder as the staff approached the music room door. Moreover, both the butler and housekeeper were familiar with the acoustics of the residence and were certain of the sound's origin. I observed my friend as he rose from his chair and began the restless pacing before our fireplace that invariably accompanied his most intense periods of mental activity. His movements were sharp and economical, his hands clasped behind his back, his profile etched against the grey light filtering through our windows like that of a hawk contemplating its prey. "The case presents several points of exceptional interest," he mused, his voice taking on the analytical tone that signaled his complete intellectual engagement. "First, we have the testimony of multiple witnesses to an acoustic phenomenon that appears to violate the basic principles of musical physics. Second, we have the deliberate removal of the violin strings, an act that suggests both knowledge and purpose. Third, the locked room circumstances eliminate the possibility of an intruder's direct involvement. Perhaps, I ventured, the strings were removed after the music was heard, some form of post-mortem interference." Holmes paused in his pacing and fixed me with a look of approval. "An excellent deduction, Watson. Indeed, that possibility must be considered. However, it raises the question of who would have both the opportunity and the motive to perform such a peculiar act, and more importantly, how they gained access to a locked room." Before I could respond, the familiar sound of Mrs. Hudson's footsteps upon our stairs announced the arrival of a visitor. Her knock upon our door was followed immediately by her entrance, her usually composed demeanor showing signs of unusual agitation. "Mr. Holmes," she began, slightly breathless from her ascent, "there is a gentleman below who insists upon seeing you immediately. He says it concerns the matter in Belgravia that has been in all the morning papers." Holmes's eyes gleamed with the particular intensity that I had learned to associate with the commencement of our most memorable adventures. "By all means, Mrs. Hudson, show him up. Watson, I believe we are about to receive first-hand intelligence regarding our phantom violinist." As our landlady descended to fetch our visitor, Holmes moved to the window and gazed out at the fog-shrouded street below. "Mark my words, Watson," he said quietly, "before this case reaches its conclusion, we shall discover that the impossible music of Belgravia has its roots in motives far more earthly than supernatural. The violin that played without strings will prove to have been manipulated by hands very much of this world." The sound of approaching footsteps upon our stairs suggested that our investigation was about to begin in earnest, and I felt the familiar thrill of anticipation that accompanied the opening moves of what promised to be one of our most intriguing cases. The gentleman who entered our sitting room carried himself with the bearing of one accustomed to society's upper echelons, yet his normally impeccable composure showed unmistakable signs of distress. He was perhaps 45 years of age, with the refined features that spoke of good breeding, though his morning coat bore subtle creases, suggesting hasty dressing, and his silk hat trembled almost imperceptibly in his gloved hands. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice a cultured baritone strained with emotion, "I am Sir Edmund Blackwood, and I come to you regarding the tragedy that has befallen my dearest friend, Mr. Reginald Ashworth of Belgravia." Holmes gestured toward our most comfortable chair, his keen grey eyes already cataloguing the subtle details of our visitor's appearance. "You arrived by hansom cab," he observed without preamble, "having stopped first at your club in Street James's, where you partook of coffee but no breakfast. The aroma lingers, yet there are no crumbs upon your waistcoat. Your left cuff bears a faint residue of newsprint, suggesting you purchased several morning editions, and the slight dampness of your coat indicates you waited some minutes in the fog before securing transportation." Sir Edmund stared at my friend with the mixture of astonishment and admiration that such demonstrations typically provoked. "Remarkable, Mr. Holmes. Yes, I spent the early morning hours at my club, reading every account of poor Reginald's death, hoping to find some detail that might explain the inexplicable." Holmes continued, settling into his own chair with the fluid grace of a cat preparing to study its prey. "Dr. Watson and I have indeed perused the morning reports, but I suspect there are aspects of this affair that have escaped public attention. You knew Mr. Ashworth intimately, I presume?" "Reginald was my closest friend," Sir Edmund replied, his voice heavy with grief. "We had been acquainted since our Cambridge days, bonded by our mutual passion for rare musical instruments. Indeed, it was I who introduced him to the dealer from whom he acquired the Guarneri violin that now lies at the center of this mystery." I observed Holmes's fingers steeple before him, a gesture that invariably accompanied his most intense periods of mental activity. "The circumstances of your friend's death have clearly affected you profoundly, yet I detect in your manner something beyond mere grief. What brings you to Baker Street, Sir Edmund?" Our visitor's composure wavered, and he withdrew a handkerchief to dab at his perspiring forehead. "The police, Mr. Holmes, have focused their suspicions upon Reginald's nephew, Mr. Charles Ashworth. The young man stands to inherit his uncle's considerable estate, including the violin collection valued at over £20,000. Inspector Bradstreet appears convinced that financial motive provides adequate explanation for what occurred. Yet you believe otherwise?" "Most emphatically. Charles is incapable of the calculated deception such a crime would require. Moreover, he was dining at the Diogenes Club until well past midnight, with numerous witnesses to confirm his whereabouts. The inspector, however, seems determined to explain away the locked room circumstances as an elaborate theatrical designed to create an impossible crime." Holmes leaned forward, his interest clearly engaged. "Tell me about Mr. Ashworth's recent behavior. Had he seemed troubled? Excited? Were there any changes in his routine or correspondence?" Sir Edmund hesitated, his fingers working nervously at his hat brim. Reginald had been unusually animated in recent weeks about what he termed a remarkable discovery concerning his collection. He hinted that he had uncovered information about the provenance of several instruments that would significantly enhance their historical importance, but he was characteristically secretive about the details. This discovery, did it relate specifically to the Guarneri? He never said explicitly, but I suspected as much. He had invited me to join him last evening for what he described as a special musical appreciation, though a prior engagement prevented my attendance. A decision I now regret most bitterly. Holmes rose and began, in his characteristic pacing before the fireplace. "The deliberate removal of the violin strings troubles me greatly, Sir Edmund. Such an act suggests either profound symbolism or practical necessity. In your knowledge of your friend's habits, can you conceive of any reason why he might have performed such a task himself?" "Absolutely inconceivable. Reginald treated his instruments with religious reverence. The very thought of him deliberately rendering the Guarneri mute is preposterous. Yet, someone with considerable expertise in stringed instruments performed that delicate operation. The newspaper accounts suggest the strings were removed with professional skill, not torn away in violence or haste. Which is precisely why Charles cannot be guilty," Sir Edmund insisted. "The boy possesses no musical training whatsoever and would be utterly incapable of such precise work." Holmes paused in his pacing, his decision crystallizing. "I shall take the case, Sir Edmund. The phantom violinist of Belgravia presents intellectual challenges that I find irresistible, and if an innocent man faces unjust accusation, duty demands our intervention. Watson, your coat and medical bag, we shall examine the scene while the evidence remains fresh." As we prepared to depart, Holmes turned once more to our client. "One final question, Sir Edmund. Had your friend any enemies? Business rivals who might covet his collection?" Reginald was universally respected in antiquarian circles. "I know of no personal animosities, though." He paused, frowning. "There was a dealer in Frankfurt who had disputed the attribution of one piece, but surely such academic disagreements do not lead to murder." Holmes smiled grimly as we descended toward the fog-shrouded street. "In my experience, Sir Edmund, the most civilized of pursuits can harbor the most savage of passions." The journey to Belgravia through London's fog-choked streets provided Holmes with an opportunity to interrogate Sir Edmund further about the peculiarities of his deceased friend's character and circumstances. Our hansom cab lurched through the grey murk, the clip-clop of the horses' hooves muffled by the thick atmosphere that seemed to swallow sound itself, creating an appropriately mysterious backdrop for our discussion of the impossible music that had preceded Mr. Ashworth's death. "Tell me about this Frankfurt dealer who disputed the attribution," Holmes inquired, his sharp profile barely visible in the dim interior of our conveyance. Academic disagreements in the world of antiquarian collecting can often mask deeper commercial rivalries. Sir Edmund shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly reluctant to cast aspersions upon a professional colleague. "Herr Wilhelm Zimmermann operates one of the most prestigious galleries on the continent. His expertise in Baroque instruments is widely acknowledged, but he can be rather aggressive in his pursuit of rare pieces. The disputed violin was a supposed Stradivarius that Reginald had acquired from an estate sale in Vienna. Zimmermann claimed it was merely a skilled contemporary copy and accused Reginald of knowingly misrepresenting its provenance." "A serious accusation in collector circles, I imagine," I observed, noting how Holmes's fingers drummed against his knee in that familiar pattern, indicating intense mental activity. "Indeed, Dr. Watson. Such allegations can destroy reputations and significantly impact the value of entire collections. Reginald was deeply wounded by the suggestion that he would engage in deliberate deception, though he maintained absolute confidence in his authentication methods." Holmes leaned forward with renewed interest. "When did this dispute occur? And was it resolved to your friend's satisfaction?" "Approximately 6 months ago, and most emphatically not resolved. Zimmermann had threatened to publish a paper in the Journal of Musical Antiquities, exposing what he termed the dangerous proliferation of misattributed instruments in English collections. Reginald was preparing a comprehensive rebuttal based on new documentary evidence he claimed to have discovered. Our cab drew to a halt before an imposing Georgian mansion whose elegant facade was barely discernible through the swirling fog. The residence of the late Mr. Ashworth occupied a corner position on one of Belgravia's most fashionable squares, its tall windows and classical proportions speaking of wealth accumulated over generations. Even in the grey morning light, the building possessed an air of refined dignity that made the tragedy within seem all the more incongruous. Holmes emerged from the cab with characteristic energy, his keen eyes immediately surveying the approaches to the building while I settled our fare. Note: Watson. The excellent sightlines from the surrounding residences. If our phantom violinist required external observation of the household's movements, he would have enjoyed ample opportunity from multiple vantage points. A constable, stationed at the Evan front entrance, recognized Holmes immediately and admitted our party without question. The interior of the Ashworth residence reflected the same refined taste evident in its exterior, with Persian carpets, oil paintings of distinguished ancestors, and furniture that spoke of comfort rather than ostentation. The butler, Pemberton appeared at our approach, a dignified man of advanced years, whose composure had clearly been shaken by recent events. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice carrying the measured tones of long service, "Inspector Bradstreet informed me that you might be calling. I confess I am grateful for your involvement, as the circumstances of my master's death have left the entire household deeply unsettled." "I should like to hear your account of last evening's events," Holmes replied. "But first, might we examine the music room where the tragedy occurred?" Pemberton led us through a series of well-appointed chambers toward the rear of the residence, where tall French doors opened onto what had once been a conservatory but had been converted into a private concert space. The room was flooded with grey light from its glass walls, revealing an extraordinary collection of stringed instruments displayed in custom-built cases along the interior walls. Violins, violas, cellos, and more exotic pieces I could not immediately identify were arranged with museum-like precision, each bearing a small placard indicating its maker, date, and historical significance. In the center of this musical shrine, outlined in chalk upon the Persian carpet, lay the unmistakable silhouette where Mr. Reginald Ashworth had met his mysterious end. Holmes approached the chalked outline with the methodical precision of a surgeon, his magnifying glass materializing in his hand as he dropped to one knee beside the marking. The Persian carpet, with its intricate patterns, seemed to hold secrets within its weave, and I watched as my friend's keen eyes began to decipher what others had missed entirely. "Watson," he murmured without looking up, "observe the carpet nap around the outline. Note how it lies disturbed in parallel lines leading from the far wall." I followed his indication and could just discern faint tracks, scarcely more than shadows against the rich fabric. "Something wheeled?" I ventured. "Precisely. Something heavy, supported by small casters, moved from that corner to within a yard of where Mr. Ashworth fell." Holmes rose and traced the marks to their origin, where the skirting board showed subtle signs of repeated contact. He lifted the edge of a nearby curtain and inhaled sharply. "Machine oil, Watson. Rancid and common, not the fine lubricant one finds in precision instruments." Pemberton, who had maintained respectful silence during this examination, cleared his throat. "Mr. Holmes, if I may describe precisely what occurred last evening." Holmes straightened, his attention now fully focused on the butler. "Omit no detail, however trivial." "I was awakened at 25 minutes past midnight by violin music from this room, Paganini's 24th Caprice, which I recognized because my master had been practicing it frequently. The performance was extraordinarily skillful, more accomplished than I had ever heard Ashworth achieve, though he was himself a capable amateur." "The music continued for how long?" Holmes asked, moving to examine the empty display case that had housed the Guarneri. "Approximately 15 minutes, sir." Mrs. Whitmore and I listened from the hallway, initially reluctant to disturb what we assumed was a private recital. However, given the late hour and our lack of notification regarding any guest, we eventually decided to investigate. Holmes tested the lock mechanism, finding no scratches or tampering. "The door was secured from within?" "Yes, sir. The key was inside, as you see it now upon the mantelpiece. We were forced to splinter the frame to gain entry." Pemberton indicated fresh gouges near the bolt. Moving to the French doors, Holmes examined each latch with meticulous care. "These windows also secure when you entered?" "Absolutely, sir." Mr. Ashworth was most particular about security, given his collection's value. Holmes knelt again beside the chalk outline, running his hand over the carpet fibers before bringing his fingers close to his nose. "A faint scent lingers here. Watson, metallic, with an undertone reminiscent of burnt sugar, not of the ordinary household." I attempted to detect the odor, but found my senses overwhelmed by the room's pervasive smell of aged wood and polish. "I confess, I notice nothing unusual, Holmes, which is precisely why it may prove significant." He moved to examine the Guarneri itself, now resting on a velvet-draped table. His long fingers traced the instrument's F-holes with reverence, testing the tension of the remaining pegs. Beside it lay the removed strings, coiled with almost ceremonial precision. Note the artistry of this arrangement, Watson. This was not done in haste or panic, but with methodical care by someone intimately familiar with stringed instruments. Sir Edmund stepped forward, his agitation evident. Surely, Mr. Holmes, you can see that no human agency could have produced music from a stringless violin. We are dealing with supernatural forces. Holmes smiled without warmth. On the contrary, Sir Edmund, I am convinced we face a most ingenious human intellect, one that has created precisely the impression you describe. The string removal was not incidental but central to the crime's execution. But the music, Pemberton heard, I began. An excellent question, Watson, which goes to our mystery's heart. However, before addressing how, we must establish why. Holmes turned back to Pemberton. In recent weeks, did Mr. Ashworth receive visitors showing particular interest in the Guarneri? The butler's expression grew troubled. Indeed, sir. Just last week, a gentleman from the continent examined that specific instrument. He claimed scholarly interest in its history, though my master seemed rather uncomfortable during the visit. Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. This continental visitor, did he provide a name? Herr Zimmermann, sir. From Frankfurt. He spent considerable time photographing the instrument and making detailed notes about its construction. The silence that followed was pregnant with implication, and I saw Holmes's mind racing toward connections that remained hidden from the rest of us. Holmes moved with renewed purpose to the corner where the mysterious tracks originated, his keen fingers exploring the skirting board with the delicacy of a surgeon. Watson, observe this discoloration, he murmured, indicating a faint brown crescent upon the white paint. Heat has been applied here, not the gentle warmth of a household fire, but something more intense and localized. He scraped a minute sample of residue with his penknife and brought it to his nose. Machine oil, mixed with what appears to be wax of an unusual composition. Before I could respond, Pemberton cleared his throat respectfully. Mr. Holmes, if I might suggest speaking with Mrs. Whitmore? She was with me when we heard the music, and her observations may prove valuable. An excellent suggestion. Holmes straightened, his attention now focused entirely on gathering testimony. Please summon her immediately. Mrs. Whitmore, when she appeared, proved to be a woman of middle years whose normally composed demeanor showed clear signs of the previous night's disturbance. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her apron, and her eyes darted nervously about the music room as though expecting some supernatural manifestation. Mrs. Whitmore, Holmes began gently, I require you to describe exactly what you heard last evening, omitting no detail, however insignificant it may seem. The housekeeper drew a steadying breath. It began with a peculiar sound, sir, a low whirring, rather like Mrs. Patterson's sewing machine when she comes for the mending, followed by a distinct click. Then the music started, but not gradually as one might expect from a musician beginning to play. It commenced at full volume, as though the performer had begun in the middle of a piece. Holmes leaned forward with intense interest. And when it ceased? Another click, sir, sharp and mechanical, then complete silence. But there lingered under the door a sweet, cloying smell, burnt sugar, as you mentioned, with a metallic tang that made one's nose smart. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor interrupted this fascinating testimony, and Inspector Bradstreet appeared in the doorway, his ruddy features bearing their characteristic expression of official determination. Behind him walked a pale young gentleman whose anxious bearing and resemblance to the late Mr. Ashworth immediately identified him as the nephew under suspicion. Mr. Holmes, Bradstreet acknowledged with a curt nod. I see you've anticipated our arrival. This is Mr. Charles Ashworth, who has requested to be present during our examination of the premises. The young man stepped forward with obvious effort. I seek only to clear my name, Mr. Holmes. The circumstances, I know, appear damning, but I swear upon my honor that I had no hand in my uncle's death. Holmes regarded him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to catalogue every detail of a person's character. Your movements last evening, Mr. Charles? I dined at the Diogenes Club from 9 o'clock until past midnight, speaking with numerous acquaintances and the hall porter upon my departure. I returned home directly, only to find the street blocked by police constables. Holmes addressed Bradstreet. What evidence supports your suspicions against this gentleman? Bradstreet produced a folded document with evident satisfaction. Promissory notes totaling £800, signed by Mr. Charles to one Felix Rowan, a luthier in Soho. Debts pressing, a wealthy uncle conveniently deceased, and violin strings removed by someone with expert knowledge of such instruments. Holmes examined the document briefly before returning it without comment. Mr. Charles, are you familiar with the technical aspects of violin maintenance? Not in the slightest, sir. I possess no musical training whatsoever and have never so much as tuned an instrument. Moving to examine the display case more closely, Holmes produced his magnifying glass and studied the lock mechanism with meticulous care. After several moments, he straightened with a grim smile. Inspector, observe these tiny metallic filings around the keyhole. Someone has taken a wax impression of this lock, recent work, judging by the freshness of the scratches. Suggesting what? Exactly, Bradstreet asked, though his tone indicated growing interest. That our perpetrator gained access through careful preparation, not chance or family connection. Holmes moved to the wall adjacent to the Guarneri's former position, running his fingers along what appeared to be seamless wallpaper. After a moment's searching, he located an almost invisible join and carefully pried it open with his penknife, revealing a small, dark aperture barely large enough for a finger. "Good heavens!" Sir Edmund exclaimed. "What is that?" Holmes peered into the opening, his expression unreadable. "An architectural modification, executed with considerable skill. Watson, note how this aperture aligns perfectly with the display case. Someone has created a hidden observation point, or perhaps something more ingenious." He pressed the wallpaper back into place and turned to face our assembled group. "Gentlemen, we are dealing with a mind of exceptional cunning, one that has orchestrated not merely a murder, but an elaborate theatrical performance designed to suggest supernatural intervention. The mechanical sounds Mrs. Whitmore described, the precise removal of the violin, strings, the hidden aperture, and the evidence of lock duplication all point to extensive premeditation." "But the music itself," I protested. "How could it have been produced without strings?" Holmes smiled enigmatically. "That, Watson, is the key to our entire mystery. When we understand how the impossible music was created, we shall know both our murderer's identity and his motive." Holmes produced a small collapsible mirror from his waistcoat and angled it expertly into the hidden aperture, his breath misting slightly in the cool morning air. After several moments of careful observation, he withdrew the instrument with evident satisfaction. "Watson, observe what lies within this carefully constructed conduit." He offered me the mirror, and peering through the opening, I glimpsed the dull gleam of polished metal components and what appeared to be a system of small pulleys. The cavity extends nearly 4 feet into the wall, terminating in a second opening that aligns precisely with the corner where our mysterious tracks originated. Dropping to his hands and knees, Holmes began a methodical examination of the carpet edge where it met the skirting board. With his tweezers, he extracted a length of fine black thread, scarcely thicker than human hair, with one end bearing a minute smear of brown wax. "Observe, Watson, a trigger mechanism of remarkable ingenuity. This thread, when pulled taut, would activate whatever device was positioned in that corner." He sealed the evidence in an envelope before returning his attention to the carpet's center, where his magnifying glass revealed a faint circular depression surrounded by brown crumbs. Machine wax, softened by friction and heat. The residue of a cylinder phonograph, I believe. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward hesitantly. The whirring sound I described. Mr. Holmes, it was precisely like Mrs. Patterson's sewing machine when she visits for the mending. Exactly so. A spring-driven mechanism, wheeled into position, and activated remotely through this ingenious thread and pulley system. Holmes straightened, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The phantom violinist was nothing more than a sophisticated mechanical performance, designed to create an impossible acoustic phenomenon while our victim met his end. Inspector Bradstreet frowned. But the locked door, Mr. Holmes? How was it secured from within, if no one remained inside? Holmes moved to the door and examined the bolt mechanism with his probe. Simplicity itself, Inspector. The same thread system that activated the phonograph could easily slide this bolt home once the performance concluded. The splintered frame merely attests to your constable's vigor in forcing entry. Sir Edmund, who had grown increasingly pale during these revelations, now spoke with evident distress. Then Reginald was murdered by this elaborate deception. Your friend likely succumbed to natural causes, the excitement of confronting an intruder perhaps, or the strain of recent anxieties. The mechanical performance was designed to overlay his death with impossible circumstances, directing suspicion away from the true perpetrator. This mention of recent anxieties prompted Mrs. Whitmore to clear her throat nervously. Sir, if I may mention, Mr. Ashworth had been most agitated since that German gentleman's visit last week. He spent entire evenings burning correspondence in the fireplace, muttering about authentication documents and professional vindication. Holmes moved immediately to the fireplace, kneeling before the cold grate and sifting through the ashes with delicate precision. After several minutes, he extracted fragments of partially burned paper, handling them with extreme care. Correspondence bearing 18th-century watermarks, Watson, exceedingly valuable if authentic, and precisely the sort of documentary evidence that could settle disputes regarding instrument provenance. Uncle Reginald mentioned discovering proof that would definitively establish the Guarneri's authenticity. Charles Ashworth added quietly. He planned to present this evidence at tomorrow evening's meeting of the Antiquarian Musical Society, specifically to refute Herr Zimmermann's accusations. The implication struck me immediately, a public vindication that would have destroyed Zimmermann's professional credibility. Precisely, Watson. The stakes extended far beyond academic disagreement, into matters of professional reputation and commercial value. Zimmermann possessed both motive and expertise. His recent visit provided opportunity to study the room's layout and take wax impressions of the locks. Holmes examined the coiled violin strings once more. These were removed with professional skill, not torn away in haste. The work of someone intimately familiar with stringed instruments. Holmes rose and addressed our assembled group. Gentlemen, we face a crime of remarkable sophistication, executed by someone possessing both mechanical genius and profound musical knowledge. The phantom violinist employed cutting-edge technology to create supernatural illusion, but his goal was decidedly earthly, eliminating evidence that threatened his reputation while ensuring suspicion fell upon convenient scapegoats. He moved toward the door with characteristic decisiveness. Inspector, I require you to maintain surveillance of this house while Watson and I pay an urgent visit to Mr. Felix Rowan. If my deductions prove correct, we shall find that our luthier has been commissioned for work extending far beyond mere instrument repair. The journey through London's fog-shrouded streets to Soho provided Holmes with an opportunity to elaborate upon the mechanical ingenuity our investigation had revealed. Our hansom cab navigated the increasingly narrow thoroughfares, the atmosphere growing thicker as we descended from Belgravia's refined heights toward the craftsmen's quarters, where specialized trades flourished in cramped workshops and cluttered studios. Watson, Holmes began, his fingers drumming against his knee in that familiar rhythm of intense cogitation. Consider the extraordinary precision required for last evening's performance. Our perpetrator needed not merely mechanical skill, but intimate knowledge of acoustics, timing mechanisms, and most crucially, the Ashworth household's routines. The hidden conduit required weeks to construct, suggesting either remarkable stealth or legitimate access to the premises. The fog seemed to part reluctantly as we entered Soho proper, revealing a maze of narrow streets lined with establishments catering to London's artistic and musical communities. Picture framers, music copyists, and instrument makers had established their trades here, creating a bohemian enclave where creativity and commerce intersected in fascinating ways. Felix Rowan's workshop occupied the ground floor of a narrow building squeezed between a sheet music publisher and a theatrical costumer. The grimy windows displayed an assortment of stringed instruments in various stages of repair, while the painted sign above the door proclaimed his specialized services in lettering barely legible through accumulated soot. The interior struck me immediately as a fascinating amalgamation of traditional craftsmanship and modern innovation. Workbenches lined the walls, their surfaces cluttered with the delicate tools of the luthier's trade chisels. Planes, varnish brushes, and measuring instruments of bewildering variety. Half-completed violins hung from the ceiling like wooden sculptures, while the air carried the mingled scents of aged wood, varnish, and that peculiar sweetness I now recognized as machine wax. Rowan himself emerged from the workshop's depths, a man of perhaps 50 years, whose slight frame belied the evident strength in his craftsman's hands. His leather apron bore the accumulated stains of his profession, and his keen blue eyes regarded us with the wariness of one accustomed to dealing with creditors and constables in equal measure. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying educated accents that suggested better circumstances in his past. "If you've come about young Ashworth's debts, I can only repeat what I've told the inspector. The lad owes me money, but hardly enough to warrant murder." Holmes approached a workbench where several small mechanical components lay arranged with professional precision. "Your reputation extends beyond mere instrument repair, Mr. Rowan. These spring mechanisms appear designed for timing rather than musical performance." He lifted a brass cylinder, examining it through his magnifying glass. "And these wax cylinders bear the distinctive composition that permeated the Ashworth music room." The luthier's face paled visibly. "I occasionally undertake specialized commissions for clients with unusual requirements. Nothing irregular in such work." "Indeed not. However, I'm particularly interested in recent work involving phonographic equipment integrated with remote activation systems." Holmes produced the brown-stained thread recovered from Belgravia. "Machine wax of a composition matching your workshop's atmosphere, Mr. Rowan. Most revealing when combined with spring-driven timing mechanisms." Rowan's composure crumbled under Holmes's penetrating gaze. "I was commissioned to create a device for theatrical purposes, a stage illusion involving phantom music. The client paid handsomely and insisted upon absolute discretion." "The client's identity?" "A German gentleman, Herr Zimmermann. He claimed it was for acoustical research, a demonstration of sound reproduction theories. He was extraordinarily particular about replicating the exact tonal qualities of a Guarneri violin." Holmes moved to a canvas-covered object in the corner. "The prototype, I presume?" With a swift motion, he drew back the covering, revealing an intricate contraption of polished brass, precision gears, and a delicate phonograph mechanism mounted on a wheeled platform identical to those we had observed at the crime scene. "A marvel of engineering," Holmes observed, "designed to create the perfect acoustic deception. Remote activation, precise timing, and sound quality indistinguishable from live performance. Mr. Rowan, you have been instrumental in creating one of the most sophisticated crimes I have encountered." The luthier's hands trembled as he gripped his workbench. "I swear I knew nothing of any murderous intent. He spoke only of scientific demonstration and paid triple my usual fee for discretion." Holmes smiled grimly. "Then you shall have opportunity to make amends by helping us apprehend your mysterious client." Holmes moved with renewed purpose to examine the leather portfolio that lay open beside the phonographic device. his keen eyes scanning the detailed architectural drawings with the intensity of a military strategist studying battle plans. Watson, observe these specifications: wall thicknesses measured to the quarter-inch, acoustic properties calculated with mathematical precision, even the exact positioning of furniture and display cases. This represents months of meticulous reconnaissance. He traced his finger along the carefully annotated measurements. Every dimension corresponds exactly to the Ashworth music room, suggesting our German friend enjoyed considerably more access to the premises than a single scholarly visit would provide. Rowan, emboldened by Holmes's obvious satisfaction with the evidence, produced a bundle of correspondence tied with string. Herr Zimmermann was most particular about maintaining written records of our communications, Mr. Holmes. He insisted upon documenting every technical specification and modification. Holmes untied the bundle with swift, economical movements, his eyes scanning each document with the methodical attention of a scholar, examining ancient manuscripts. Among the papers, he discovered detailed timing charts, acoustic calculations, and most significantly, a hotel receipt bearing the letterhead of the Imperial Hotel, Russell Square, dated merely 3 days prior. The gentleman maintains lodgings in London under the name Herr Weiss, a transparent alias that suggests either arrogance or carelessness, Holmes observed, sealing the receipt in an envelope. Mr. Rowan, you mentioned that Zimmermann was to collect additional components this evening? The luthier nodded nervously. A refined governor mechanism and quieter springs, designed to eliminate the mechanical sounds that Mrs. Whitmore detected. He was most insistent that the device operate in complete silence for future applications. Holmes examined the brass components with his magnifying glass, noting the precision of their manufacture. German engineering of the highest caliber, far beyond anything required for mere theatrical illusion. These modifications suggest our adversary plans additional performances. The question remains, I interjected, how do we apprehend a man of such evident cunning and preparation? Holmes smiled with grim satisfaction. By exploiting the very perfectionism that drove him to commission such an elaborate device. Mr. Rowan, you will compose a telegraph message to Herr Weiss at the Imperial Hotel, informing him that a critical flaw has been discovered in the remote activation mechanism, a subtle timing irregularity that could cause fractional delays in the musical performance under certain atmospheric conditions. Rowan's eyes widened with understanding. He will be compelled to investigate personally. His reputation for technical excellence would never permit such imperfection. Precisely. The message must emphasize urgency while suggesting that only his expert evaluation can determine whether the flaw requires complete reconstruction or mere adjustment. Holmes dictated the precise wording while Rowan transcribed with trembling hands. Dispatch this immediately, requesting his presence at 7 o'clock this evening for technical consultation. While the telegraph was being prepared, Holmes began a systematic examination of the workshop's layout, noting sightlines, potential concealment positions, and escape routes with the thoroughness of a general preparing for siege. Watson, I require you to retrieve Inspector Bradstreet and inform him that we shall require his presence here by 6:30, along with 2 reliable constables in plain clothes. Sir Edmund should accompany you. His testimony regarding Zimmermann's previous threats will prove valuable. The fog outside seemed to press against the grimy windows with increasing density as afternoon shadows lengthened into early evening. Holmes positioned himself near the workshop's rear window, his attention focused on the narrow alley that provided secondary access to the building. Our German friend is methodical in his preparations, Watson. He will arrive punctually, but he will also survey the premises thoroughly before entering. The alley provides an excellent vantage point for such reconnaissance. As I prepared to depart for Inspector Bradstreet, Holmes produced his notebook and began sketching the workshop's interior with rapid, precise strokes. When you return, we shall be ready to stage the final act of this remarkable performance. Herr Zimmermann has demonstrated considerable theatrical flair in his criminal endeavors. It seems only appropriate that his apprehension should possess similar dramatic qualities. The sound of the telegraph boy's departure echoed through the narrow streets as I stepped into the fog-shrouded afternoon, knowing that the evening would bring either triumph or the escape of one of the most ingenious criminals we had yet encountered. Holmes's confidence was evident, but I could not shake the feeling that Zimmerman's sophistication and careful planning made him a formidable adversary who would not surrender easily to even the most carefully laid trap. The return journey through London's fog-shrouded streets proved more challenging than anticipated, with visibility reduced to mere yards as the November mist thickened into an almost impenetrable grey shroud. Inspector Bradstreet, accompanied by 2 reliable constables in plain clothes, maintained professional skepticism regarding our elaborate trap, though his willingness to cooperate suggested that Sir Edmund's testimony about Zimmerman's threatening behavior had made a compelling impression upon his practical mind. "Mr. Holmes," Bradstreet observed as our hansom cab navigated the treacherous streets at walking pace, "this German fellow strikes me as far too clever to walk blindly into such an obvious snare. What prevents him from simply abandoning his mechanical contraption and disappearing back to the continent?" Holmes adjusted his collar against the penetrating dampness that seemed to seep through even our closed conveyance. "Pride, Inspector, the fatal weakness that has destroyed more criminal masterminds than carelessness or greed combined. Zimmerman has invested months in perfecting his acoustic deception, and his professional reputation depends upon flawless execution. The suggestion that his masterpiece contains a fundamental flaw will compel him to investigate personally, regardless of potential danger." We arrived at Rowan's workshop precisely as the church bells chimed 6:30. The fog now so dense that the gas lamps appeared as mere amber halos struggling against the oppressive grey blanket that had enveloped the city. Holmes immediately took command of our small force with the tactical precision of a military commander preparing for siege. "Gentlemen," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the muffled sounds of distant traffic, "our quarry possesses both extreme caution and considerable intellect. We must therefore ensure that every detail appears entirely natural, every movement precisely choreographed." He gestured toward the narrow rear door leading to the enclosed yard. "Inspector, position your constables in the alleyway with clear sight lines to both entrances. They must remain absolutely silent, their presence entirely unsuspected." Bradstreet nodded curtly and dispatched his men with terse instructions. They melted into the fog-shrouded darkness like phantoms, their heavy footsteps quickly absorbed by the damp atmosphere. "Sir Edmund," Holmes continued, "your genuine distress regarding your friend's death will lend authenticity to our performance. Position yourself near the front window as though awaiting a late client, but remain slightly concealed from direct street observation." The workshop itself had been transformed into a shadowy theatre, with gas lamps dimmed to create long, dancing shadows among the hanging instruments. Rowan, visibly nervous despite Holmes's reassuring presence, busied himself at his workbench with a half-finished violin scroll, periodically wiping perspiration from his brow with a stained cloth. Holmes positioned himself behind a tall cabinet containing violin necks, his lean form barely visible in the dim interior, yet commanding an unobstructed view of the entire premises. I took station beside him, my medical bag at hand should circumstances require it. The minutes that followed stretched with agonizing slowness, marked only by the distant rumble of fog-muffled omnibuses and the occasional footstep of pedestrians navigating the treacherous pavements. The very air seemed heavy with anticipation, each tick of the workshop's grandfather clock echoing like hammer blows, counting down to our quarry's arrival. At 10 minutes before 7, Holmes raised his hand in a gesture demanding absolute silence, his keen ears having detected some sound that escaped the rest of us entirely. Through the grimy window, a shadowy figure emerged from the fog with the deliberate movements of someone intimately familiar with the neighborhood's layout. The man was of medium height and compact build, wearing a dark overcoat and bowler hat that rendered him virtually indistinguishable from thousands of other London gentlemen. However, his behavior immediately marked him as our target. He paused frequently to survey the surrounding buildings, his head turning with the systematic thoroughness of a scout reconnoitering potentially hostile territory. After several minutes of careful observation, the figure approached Rowan's door with measured steps, producing what appeared to be a key from his waistcoat pocket. The lock turned with well-oiled precision, and the door opened just wide enough to admit his frame before closing again with barely audible care. "Herr Zimmermann, I presume," Holmes said quietly from his concealment, his voice carrying across the workshop with startling clarity in the sudden silence. "Your reputation for mechanical ingenuity precedes you, though I confess curiosity about your methods of lock acquisition." The figure in the doorway remained motionless for several heartbeats, his hand still gripping the brass handle as Holmes's words echoed through the workshop's shadowed interior. When he finally stepped forward and closed the door with deliberate precision, his movements carried the controlled grace of a man accustomed to dangerous situations. "Herr Holmes," he replied, his cultured Germanic accent unmistakable despite his obvious attempt at composure. "Your reputation for dramatic entrances precedes you, though I confess surprise at finding you in such humble surroundings." His pale blue eyes swept the workshop with predatory swiftness, cataloguing exits and potential weapons with the methodical attention of a chess master evaluating his position. Holmes emerged from concealment with fluid grace, his tall form materializing from the shadows like an avenging spirit. "Your own reputation for mechanical ingenuity is equally well established, Herr Wilhelm Zimmermann of Frankfurt, though I must say, your choice of the pseudonym Weiss lacks the imagination I would expect from the creator of such an elaborate acoustic deception." Zimmermann's composure flickered momentarily, but he recovered with admirable swiftness. "I am merely a dealer in musical antiquities, consulting with Herr Rowan regarding a mechanical difficulty. If you represent some official inquiry, I demand proper credentials." "Official inquiry?" Holmes smiled with that peculiar mixture of admiration and contempt he reserved for worthy adversaries. "I prefer to speak of logical deduction, Herr Zimmermann. The deduction that your phantom violinist was nothing more than this ingenious mechanical device designed to create impossible circumstances while eliminating evidence that threatened your professional reputation." Moving to the canvas-covered phonographic contraption, Holmes drew back the covering with theatrical flourish. "Rowan's craftsmanship is exceptional, but the true genius lies in your application, a spring-driven mechanism capable of reproducing the exact tonal qualities of a Guarneri violin, activated remotely through an ingenious thread and pulley system." Zimmermann's eyes fixed upon the exposed device, and for the first time, genuine emotion flickered across his refined features. "You cannot prove these fantastic allegations with mere mechanical curiosities." "Can I not?" Holmes produced a small wax cylinder from his coat, holding it to the gaslight where Germanic script was clearly visible. "Caprice 24, Guarneri, Ashworth. This recording, made during your scholarly visit to Belgravia, captures not merely the violin's voice but the acoustic signature of the music room itself. Shall we demonstrate?" Without waiting for response, Holmes placed the cylinder upon Rowan's phonograph. The mechanism purred to life, and suddenly Paganini's 24th Caprice filled the workshop with such clarity and precision that even my untrained ear could detect the unmistakable resonance of the Ashworth residence. "The acoustic fingerprint is unmistakable," Holmes continued as the music faded. "The same performance that awakened Pemberton and Mrs. Whitmore, created by your mechanical violinist while you waited in the adjacent room, manipulating the activation thread through that carefully constructed wall conduit." Zimmermann's shoulders sagged slightly, though his voice remained steady. "Reginald Ashworth died of natural causes. His weak heart simply failed when confronted with the evidence of his scholarly inadequacy." "Indeed, his death was natural," Holmes agreed, "but your elaborate deception transformed tragedy into mystery, nearly condemning an innocent man while destroying evidence that would have vindicated your rival's authentication methods." The rear door burst open with military precision, admitting Inspector Bradstreet and his constables. Their presence filled the cramped workshop, eliminating any possibility of escape. "The documentary evidence you sought to suppress," Holmes continued relentlessly, "will be found in your hotel rooms at the Imperial, along with the tools of your trade lockpicks, wax impression materials, and detailed architectural plans of the Ashworth residence." Zimmerman straightened with evident effort, his professional pride overriding his precarious circumstances. "You have indeed outmaneuvered me, Herr Holmes. But understand this, I serve the cause of scholarly accuracy. Ashworth's authentication methods were sloppy, his documentation inadequate." "Wilhelm Zimmerman," Inspector Bradstreet announced, stepping forward with handcuffs gleaming in the gaslight. "I arrest you for the murder of Reginald Ashworth, conspiracy to pervert justice, and burglary." As the constables secured their prisoner, Holmes turned to me with satisfaction evident in his keen grey eyes. "The phantom violinist has played his final performance. Watson, tomorrow's meeting of the Antiquarian Musical Society will hear a very different sort of music, the harmony of truth, triumphant over deception." The grey November dawn that followed Zimmerman's arrest brought with it a clarity that seemed to extend beyond mere meteorological phenomena. From our lodgings at Baker Street, Holmes and I received Inspector Bradstreet's detailed report of the search conducted at the Imperial Hotel, a document that transformed our theoretical deductions into irrefutable fact. The German's rooms had yielded a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Wax impressions of the Ashworth door key, wrapped in oiled silk, a complete set of precision lockpicks arranged in a velvet-lined case, architectural drawings matching those found in Rowan's workshop, and most significantly, a leather portfolio containing the very authentication documents that Reginald Ashworth had died defending. Holmes examined these recovered papers with the reverence of a scholar handling ancient manuscripts, his magnifying glass revealing watermarks and ink compositions that spoke eloquently of their 18th-century origins. "Watson," he observed, spreading the documents across our breakfast table. "Observe the exquisite irony of our adversary's position. These bills of sale from Cremona, these luthier's notes bearing the seal of Italian nobility, these maintenance records spanning 2 centuries, they constitute absolute proof of the Guarneri's provenance. Zimmerman stole the very evidence that would have vindicated his rival's methods and destroyed his own reputation." Sir Edmund Blackwood, who had called upon us early that morning, studied the documents with eyes bright with unshed tears. To think that Reginald possessed complete vindication, yet died believing his scholarly integrity was in question. Had he lived another day, his triumph at the Antiquarian Musical Society would have been absolute. The psychological dimensions of Zimmerman's scheme revealed themselves with devastating clarity as Holmes reconstructed the criminal's methodology. The German had exploited his scholarly reputation to gain repeated access to the Ashworth residence, using each visit to advance his elaborate plan. The hidden conduit had been constructed over weeks, requiring not merely technical skill but intimate knowledge of the house's daily routines. The mechanical device itself represented months of collaboration with Rowan, its specifications refined to reproduce not merely the Guarneri's voice, but the acoustic signature of the music room itself. "The genius of the deception," Holmes explained to our assembled company, "lay not in its mechanical sophistication alone, but in its psychological manipulation of circumstance. By creating the phantom violinist performance, Zimmerman transformed Ashworth's natural death into an impossible mystery that would have consumed investigative attention while the stolen documents disappeared forever." Inspector Bradstreet's subsequent investigation revealed the true scope of Zimmerman's operations. Correspondence found among his effects detailed similar schemes targeting prominent collectors across Europe, each involving the systematic theft of authentication documents, followed by public challenges to their victims' scholarly methods. The mechanical violinist had been intended as merely the first of several such devices, each calibrated to create impossible circumstances that would obscure the true nature of the crimes. Charles Ashworth, completely vindicated by the recovered evidence, inherited not merely his uncle's collection, but the burden of its proper stewardship. The young man's relief was evident as he expressed his intention to donate the Guarneri to the British Museum, ensuring that its authenticated provenance would serve scholarship rather than private vanity. Felix Rowan, his cooperation having proved invaluable to the investigation, received the leniency that Holmes had recommended. The luthier's mechanical genius, however misapplied, represented craftsmanship of the highest order, and his willingness to assist in Zimmermann's capture demonstrated genuine remorse for his unwitting participation in the scheme. The legal proceedings that followed proved swift and decisive. Zimmermann's confession, extracted under the weight of overwhelming evidence, led to his conviction on charges of burglary, conspiracy to pervert justice, and the unlawful modification of private property. More importantly, his exposure resulted in a comprehensive review of authentication practices throughout the European antiquarian community, establishing new standards for scholarly verification that would protect collectors for generations to come. As evening approached and the gas lamps of Baker Street began their nightly vigil, Holmes retrieved his violin from its corner case. The instrument, a modest example of 19th-century craftsmanship, seemed to glow with inner warmth as he drew the bow across its strings. The melody that emerged, a haunting air that spoke of both melancholy and triumph, filled our sitting room with genuine beauty, a fitting counterpoint to the mechanical perfection of Zimmermann's elaborate fraud. The difference between authentic art and mere reproduction, Holmes murmured as the final notes faded, lies not in technical precision but in the human soul that guides the performance. Perhaps that was Zimmermann's greatest error, believing that perfect mechanical reproduction could substitute for genuine creation. I observed my friend as he returned the instrument to its case with characteristic care, noting the satisfaction that marked the conclusion of a particularly engaging intellectual challenge. Another mystery solved, Holmes, though I confess the complexity of this deception exceeded even your usual standards. Indeed, Watson, the phantom violinist of Belgravia, will long serve as a reminder that in our modern age, the impossible may prove merely the improbable disguised by superior technology. He moved to his desk and began organizing the case notes with methodical precision. Yet truth, however elaborately concealed, possesses a persistence that no mechanical contrivance can ultimately defeat. Outside our windows, London's vast expanse stretched into the November darkness, its countless mysteries awaiting our attention. The case of the violin that played without strings had reached its conclusion, but somewhere in the city's labyrinthine streets, new puzzles were already taking shape, ready to challenge the deductive powers that had once again triumphed over deception and restored justice to its proper throne.